All right, so today let's talk a little bit about character creation in various video games because I think this is an interesting topic. Guys will create female characters in some games, right? And sometimes people make characters because they're trying to make a character that looks like themselves. And then sometimes people make characters that don't look like themselves because they wish that they were different than what they are. And so they're kind of role playing what they wish they were in a video game because they aren't that in real life, right? So like maybe a simple example of this would be a guy who is wheelchair bound and can't walk makes a character that's buff and runs around because he will be able to not be wheelchair bound in the video game, right? Like I saw a thing where somebody said, why are we not more inclusive of disabled people in video games? And somebody else responded to this and said, okay, so I am in a wheelchair and I'm disabled and I do not want to go into a video game and role play being a disabled person because I don't want to be a disabled person in real life. I am, but that's not something that I want to be. I don't have a choice to be disabled in real life. That's what I am. Therefore, when I play a video game, I want to role play not being disabled, right? Like that's kind of like a no-brainer. But somebody who isn't disabled says, well, why don't we have people in, people in wheelchairs rolling around Skyrim or something? Okay, yeah. Well, that's not really what the disabled people want, probably, But anyway, maybe I'm kind of getting off in the weeds a little bit, but the point is sometimes people make a video game character because they're trying to role play what they want to be. Sometimes they try to make a character that's kind of like themselves because they want to role play themselves just in maybe a different environment. Like I normally try to make my video game characters look a little bit like me. Like not exactly like me because you never can make a video game character that looks exactly like me. But I don't really care. It just winds up being a medium or small sized guy with the same color hair, maybe the same color eyes as what I've got, and kind of, go from there, right? And then my style of character winds up looking a little bit kind of like what I think I would enjoy wearing if I was actually there in that environment. So I don't really do the crazy wild stuff like looking like I'm a werewolf or looking like I'm a skeleton or something wild like that, because I just want to look like me, kind of, like it's that's how I see it. I'm not anything other than just myself like I'd be in real life, only I'm in a virtual world, right? So I make my characters look kind of like me. So that's just how I do it. But then there's other people who they look at their characters kind of like if you made a character in The Sims and you make a house for the character and they live in a little house. Well, that person in the video game isn't you necessarily, right? Like it's more like a virtual person that you are able to look in on, but they're not you. So in that particular case, you would design them just based on something arbitrary, or you'd design them based on something that you wanted. Like maybe you'd make them look like your friends or something like that. I don't know. But you're not going to be creating a character necessarily that looks like you, because in that particular case, you're making a character that is not you, like their own identity that's not you. You're just kind of like that god in the background that's sort of running their life, but they are themselves different from you. So sometimes when people make characters in video games, that's kind of how they see it. Like they're creating a virtual person that's not themselves. Now, what's interesting is there's a certain sex appeal to characters, that are created, right? So like there's kind of like the waifu husbando element where people are making, like girls are making characters that look like a guy they think is sexy, or a guy is making a female character because they like women and they want to make a female character that is sexy and cute or whatever, right? So then you have a guy who's playing a girl character, and it's not because he sees himself as a woman, it's because he wanted to create kind of like a virtual character that's not him. So that's like the waifu thing going on, right? But then maybe somebody else, like especially in an MMO, somebody else is going to find this good looking woman character and they're going to be like, hello, madam, like you are really fine looking in your virtual cleavage there. And then they find out, oh, that's actually just Bob on the other side of the screen. That is not a fine looking woman that you are interacting with. That's that girl is well, that's an acronym for guy in real life, right? So, you know, there's some of that. But then there's also probably the trans kind of people that are like, oh, like I'm a dude, but you know what? I kind of on some level I wish I was a woman. So maybe they're actually fruity, you know, like that's why they made that character. You know, more power to them if that's what you want to do. But you know, it's kind of interesting though. Like there's so many different motivations behind why do people make characters that they do. You know, like I play Genshin Impact, and in Genshin Impact I like that game, but I like it because you collect characters and they're all cute, and many of them are, well, actually it's kind of, I don't know, it's probably like a 50-50 split at this point. There's a lot of male characters and there's a lot of female characters, and in Genshin Impact they're all kind of aesthetically pleasing. You know, like I wouldn't say that they're all sexy characters because they're not, but they're all very artistically pleasing. And so there's that urge to collect them just because they are cute, and that is a sex appeal thing in many cases. Not in every case, it depends on the character, but in many cases it is. But in the case of Genshin Impact, you'd be collecting a character, but it's also understood that you are not playing as that character. That character is more part of your party. So it's kind of like, from a role-playing perspective, you are off on an adventure and they are traveling with you as a companion. But then let's like the pivot, let's look at Black Desert Online. Black Desert Online is a game where you'll create a character, and that character is bound to a specific class, and the classes are actually gender locked. So you would have a specific class which would be female, and then you have other classes which are male. And if you wanted to play that specific class, you would have to be male or female respectively, depending on what type of character you were building. And then as time's gone on, they've increased the number of different classes, so you can kind of probably have a build based on whether you're a male or a female character. You can find a build that works for you in that game. I haven't played that game very much, truthfully, just because the graphics felt kind of muddy and the world didn't feel all that interesting. But there are definitely some pretty cool things about Black Desert Online, and the character creator is top of the list. It's very, very in-depth and super cool to see. But unfortunately, it's one of those deals where you wind up spending 3 hours in the character creator, and then when you actually get to the game, you're like, I don't know about this, and then you never play it again. But all of this to say, people have a lot of different motivations when they make different characters, and sometimes it's because they want to make a character that's attractive to them. Sometimes it's because they want to make a character that empowers themselves to essentially have a virtual extension of themselves. And I think probably that's one reason why I do like the Elder Scrolls Online, because overall in the game, I think while you have all of those different dynamics going on, for the greater part, I think a lot of people in ESO make characters that reflect themselves to a point. Like, obviously, you know, if you are playing as a vampire or something, that doesn't mean you identify as a vampire. But the point I'm getting at is that people tend to make characters that reflect an extension of themselves to some degree. Not always, but many times. So it feels like when you see another character in the game, that's quite potentially, that's kind of how that person, how the real person on the other side of the screen may see themselves. Like, not that they look exactly like that, but that's kind of how they would aspire to look, maybe, you know? So I think that adds a level of authenticity to the game, where it feels like even if the characters aren't real, they are a realistic representation of how the people that are playing their characters may feel about themselves. Versus some other games where I think like Black Desert Online would be definitely a lot more of an example of a game where probably almost never would the character that somebody makes actually be a fair representation or reflection of how the players saw themselves. It would be much more of a, you know, the kind of a wall of separation, I guess, between how you see yourself as a player and how you see the character you've created. And I think the more a game allows people to express themselves, so it feels like it's kind of like a real people in a virtual world versus completely fake characters that don't have any connection to the players behind them. I think the more authenticity there is there, the more you have a sense of a grounded community that sees each other in the game and feels like, you know, like that's more meaningful. You know, it's not just a character. It's also, it's a way to interact with a real person. Though I will say, in ESO, I don't really interact with a lot of people, just because I wind up usually just kind of playing solo and selling mats and doing single player questing and stuff. So I haven't really involved myself with the community a whole lot. I think that's actually one thing that Guild Wars 2 does better than ESO. Because in Guild Wars 2, it's super easy to just jump into a group with other people and do random things. Whereas in ESO, it feels a lot more like, you know, why would you group up with people? Because there's not really much to do with other people in a group. But then again, that's kind of how life is, isn't it? Like, you live your life kind of in solitude, potentially, but then you see other people around. You know other people are around. And it's just nice to know there's other people in the world around you, so the world feels alive. And maybe they're just minding their business, they're doing their own thing, but you still catch a glimpse of them as they're running around, as they're going by. You see how they customize their characters, you see their cosmetics, and you get a feel for, you know, the kind of people that you are around. So it feels like a virtual society. Kind of like if you went to the grocery store, you aren't necessarily hanging out with all those people at the grocery store, but you still see the shirts they're wearing, you see how they carry themselves, you get a feel for what is important to them and what's interesting to them, and on some level, even if you're not really actively interacting with them, you still feel like, on some level, just the fact that they're there makes you part of society. So I guess the question comes down to, if you've got this far, what is it that makes you feel motivated to make a character in a game? And what do you what do you like to do? Do you like to make a character that looks like you and is kind of like the digital version of you? Or do you like to make a character that's totally different than you in a way that, you know, you don't identify with that character at all? Do you like to make characters that are maybe the same gender as you? Or do you like to create characters that you think are attractive? You know, what is it that makes you tick when it comes to making characters in video games? I think that's an interesting conversation. And I think there's also something to be said for the fact that it's more important than people really want to talk about. Genshin Impact is a great example of this. Just saying. Like, I know it's a gacha game, it's a different genre to a point than an MMO, but it's still an RPG. And the fact that Genshin Impact pulls in so many dollars from people that are essentially gambling on characters, it proves that people care a lot about how their character looks. That's just the truth. Like, when I started playing New World, that was one of the first things that just disappointed me. You load into the game, it looks like it's gonna be a gorgeous game, and then you get to the character creator and you look at it and say, you've got to be kidding me. Like, there's no options at all to customize your character. Like, it's just so basic. And then that just immediately puts a bad taste in your mouth, because you want to be able to sit there and have that character creator experience and make a character one way or the other that reflects the flavor you want in your game. And if you don't have that, or you don't like the art style of the characters in the game, that can be much more of a deal breaker than you might realize. And people don't want to admit it because they want to focus on the mechanics and other aspects of gameplay and say, oh, it doesn't really matter what your character looks like. But whenever you have the opportunity to see people vote with their dollars, I think you absolutely see that there's proof that people care a lot about how their characters look. Just look at cosmetics in Elder Scrolls Online. People will go buy a skin for a mount or something like that, and that doesn't do anything at all for the mechanics of the game. But it's just cool, because you know what? You want to ride an aardvark. So if you are going to have the opportunity to ride an aardvark instead of a horse, then maybe you're going to spend a certain number of crowns to have the aardvark or the special hat or whatever it is that you think is cool. And it does nothing to do with whether the game is going to have good mechanics or bad mechanics. It's about whether you can make a character that reflects a sense of who you are, or maybe what your values are, or what your interests are, whatever it might be. I think character creation is an extremely important aspect of gameplay. And whenever there isn't good character customization, it winds up hurting a game. And when there's good character customization, it winds up being a boon. Anyway, just thought I'd talk a little bit about that, because I think it's so interesting how people's motivations wind up being so different in terms of why they make characters look the way they do, and you know, what it is psychologically that makes a person make a character the way they do. I remember I heard about a guy who worked on the team that developed one of those games like Life by You, I think, which now has been canceled, but he also worked on the team that was developing The Sims 3, I believe. He was interviewed, and he said that in the early launches of The Sims, it was amazing how many people made characters that were dramatically different than themselves. And then when they were actually asked what kind of characters they had made, they tended to lie about it. But because it was some sort of a public test, the devs could see what characters they actually had made in the game. And so, you know, I think what it all boils down to is the average player is going to say, yeah, I just make like a really vanilla character that's like, looks like me. But then the reality is, when that guy is actually at the character creator, he makes some sort of a super sexy female character with big boobs. Like, that's what he does. But then when he actually says, like, what character did you make? Like, he's gonna say, oh, I just made the character that looked like me. but then he actually made some kind of wild character that's totally different. Like, people just have this desire to, I guess, express creativity in a way that feels safe, and video games give them a chance to do that. Because there really is no judgment, right? Like, when you make a character, you go out into a game world, nobody's going to judge you for it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you did. And so there's a sense of freedom of expression there. Whereas in real life, we always worry about what other people think. Like, even if you were going to put on a shirt that says that you're a fan of a specific video game, or a fan of a specific politician, or whatever it might be, you're going to think, well, I probably shouldn't wear this or that at work because, that's might be controversial, or I don't want to be seen, showing off this particular opinion because maybe it'll offend somebody or whatever. Like, we always think about these things, but in video games, that's one thing I think is pretty cool. We have an open forum where people can express themselves freely, safely, and at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether I think your character looks stupid or I think it looks cool. If I think the reason why you made it the way you did is valid, or I don't think that, it doesn't matter, because it's your character. And when you combine freedom with anonymity, you find that people do a lot of interesting things that you might not expect them to do if you know them in real life. Cheers to creativity and freedom of expression, however you choose to do that. If there is a lesson to be learned, maybe that is the lesson we should learn from gaming. In this particular case, freedom of expression is a good thing, and being comfortable to be yourself without feeling like you have to hide a portion of who you are, I think that that's important too. In any case, I'd love to hear what you think about character creation and how much it means to you in the games that you play. As always, thanks for watching. Till next time.